Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was welcomed by his South African counterpart for talks in Pretoria on Monday, in a visit that has sparked criticism against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine. His visit comes as South African military prepares to host a joint military exercise with Russia and China on its east coast from February 17 to 27. The naval drills will coincide with the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022. Lavrov's visit is the second in 6 months, and it comes ahead of the Russia-Africa Summit, which was postponed last year due to the war in Ukraine. A new date is now fixed for July 2023. Joining us right now to discuss the proposed South African military drill with Russia and China is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Good morning, Prof. Thank you very much for joining us on the Morning Show.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Rufai. And good morning, Aya.
Good morning.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Prof, South Africa, naval drill with Russia and China. The South African Foreign Affairs Minister, Naledi Pandor, was quoted as saying yesterday that, look, this is South Africa's own choice, and South Africa as a sovereign state has the right to engage in diplomatic relations as it deems with its partners. More so, as South Africa is a member of the BRICS, and this is just in the course of normal diplomatic relations. But why do you think there has been so much objection, criticism of this proposed naval drill in the Indian Ocean among these three countries?
Thank you very much for your question. The lady, the South African Foreign Minister, has been addressing all the wrong issues. Nobody is saying that South Africa does not have the right as a sovereign nation to pick and choose its friends internationally. But South Africa is not an island unto itself. Let me give a bit of a background to this. The South Atlantic Ocean is the only ocean in the world where there is no permanent superpower confrontation or permanent superpower presence. You have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which handles their confrontation in the North Atlantic. As far back as 1976, please mark my dates. As far back as 1976, the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, at that time, proposed a Nigeria, Brazil, Angola axis to spearhead the protection of the South Atlantic Ocean and prevent the incursion into it by the superpowers. It didn't go down well in Nigeria. Our socialist colleagues in the university said, oh, Angola is newly independent. It's a socialist country. Nigeria and Brazil are capitalist countries, and that our proposal was to muscle the independence of Angola. Nothing happened. In fact, I almost lost my job as Director General of the Nigerian Institute over it. It was T.Y. Danjuma who said there's nothing wrong with the proposal. The sitting president at that time couldn't understand where I was coming from, and whatever he doesn't understand, he finds it as threatening to his own posture as the heavy brain of foreign policy in Nigeria at that time. So nothing came out of it. But even as Minister of External Affairs, I again came up with the proposal, this time with the understanding of President Babangida, who knew where I was coming from. But you see, it entailed because people, our people say if you are going to blame the fox, but blame the chicken also for straying outside. Nigeria has continuously abdicated its responsibility for promoting genuine and pristine ideas in this area. Part of the problem is that the Nigerian Navy prefers to be a coastal navy and monitor the activities of pirates, monitor the activities of oil bunkers, and ignore the fact that our exclusive economic zone stretches 200 all the way into the deep sea, and that Japanese, Chinese, and other fishing vessels were coming to scrape from the bottom our fisheries and other economic assets in the deep blue sea. They've turned their back on that. And you have a situation in West Africa where there are more admirals than there are ships. Because if the Nigerian Navy had been prepared to be a deep blue sea navy, it would have been in a position actually to carry this proposal about protecting the South Atlantic Ocean from incursion by superpower presence. Now let me make this clear. Nobody is saying ships cannot visit. Naval ships are all over the world visiting each other. They are training their own people, and they need to have their ships refueled. So they stop by on their way to refuel, exchange flags, shake hands with fellow admirals. It happens all the time. I recall a time when Brazil was having, I don't know, whether it was 100 years of its navy, and it invited naval ships from all over the world to come and help us celebrate that occasion. You can imagine the pride of Nigerians who were in Brazil when a Nigerian naval ship, captained at that time by Captain Aduwo, showed up in Brazil and took part in the, ships, sailing by with flags flying and so on. That happens all the time. Nobody is protesting about that. Even for us here in Nigeria, French ships, American ships, British ships, from time to time dock at Apapa. They exchange flags, they refuel, and they go their own way. If you have maybe ships that can join them in firing a few guns, you do that. Nobody is protesting that. But when at a time when there is a cleavage in the world between, on one hand, the Western global North, and on the other hand, what I would call the East or Pacific global North, represented by Russia and China, it is unwise to bring that kind of conflict into the South Atlantic Ocean. I think that's the point we are making. The timing is wrong. That's number one. Number two, for heaven's sake, the South African Navy has 4 corvettes. Only one in the past 2 years has gone out to sea. They have 3 submarines, I believe. None has gone out to sea. So what joint exercises are you having? The joint exercise between the rider and the horse? You just want to get yourself dragged into a conflict which is not of your own making. Have we been consulted? When I say we who are also guardians of the South Atlantic Ocean, Nigeria, Angola, Brazil on the other side, all those of us who pledged to make the South Atlantic Ocean conflict-free? Have we been consulted? My investigation is that we have not been consulted. And if there's going to be joint exercise in this area, why not between South Africa, Angola, Nigeria, and then on the other side, Brazil, which other South American nations have blue sea navies? Why not with them? Is South Africa pretending to be a superpower now? That you will get involved in the conflict of superpowers? You're a medium power. There are medium powers that surround this area. So I think that the criticism has come, number one, because of the timing. Two, because you are getting involved with, well, should we say friends who are by far more powerful than you. John F. Kennedy was warned, don't ride on the back of a tiger, because the only way to get off is to end up inside the tiger. I think that is the general background to why people, or some of us, are raising red flags at this time about the implication of what South Africa is about to do. Let me say one more thing. This reminds me of something that happened when I was a foreign minister. When Libya went to tweak American, tail, American toes, or whatever language you want us to use. What's his name now? Reagan was in the White House. Reagan got so pissed off, he sent bombers to bomb Tripoli. And we kept quiet. And of course, again, our so-called socialist left-wingers in Nigeria now came after my blood. Why are we not supporting Libya in its confrontation with the United States? I then came up with the doctrine of consultation, that Gaddafi did not consult us when he was going to get into this fracas with the United States. Why should he now be seeking our support when the Americans decide to return blows? We are too important, even as we have problems on our hand. We are too important to turn ourselves into errand boys. So other countries will now snap their fingers and we will go running. Of course, in order to, again, please the public, IBB sent me on a condolence visit where I met Gaddafi, his two sons, signed condolence books. I have pictures of myself and Gaddafi's two sons that we took under olive trees. So South Africa should be careful. South Africa is not an island unto itself.
All right, thank you very much,
It is an African country.
For giving us that background into the relationships. But when you trace the relationship between, as Doctor had highlighted, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Despite you saying that South Africa is not a superpower, but a medium power, they have enjoyed relationships since South Africa joined them in 2010. Therefore, this is not the first time they're having joint drills. In 2019, they had a joint drill. However, as you have highlighted, the difference at this point is the timing. The proposed joint military drill would coincide with 1 year after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And of course, the fact that South Africa, even though maintaining the fact that they are neutral in the war, their body language speaks a bit differently. They abstained from the UN vote to condemn Russia's attack on Ukraine, and they haven't, when their foreign minister, Ms. Pandor, had spoken against it, she had to withdraw her statement. So despite the fact that you have mentioned that South Africa should not meddle in the big men's war, as it were, they have a stake. They have enjoyed relationships with Russia over time, and Russia has invested in the South African, economy as well. what should South Africa then be speaking against one of their close allies in the BRICS, in that BRICS nation, the joint working, or should they better align with their African counterparts like Nigeria? Then where does Nigeria fit into all these things? Because we call ourselves superpower on the African continent, but we're not even part of the BRICS nation. We're not part of the five countries that make up BRICS.
Ayo, thank you. Foreign policy is not a 1 + 1 = 2. It's filled with so many nuances that when you are designing a policy to address one particular issue, it's not one factor that comes into play. I mean, Brazil is a member of BRICS. It is calibrating its relationship with even other members of BRICS. India is a member of BRICS. Do you know that actually there is, I won't say a conflict, but relationship between China and India in terms of the presence of their navies in the Indian Ocean is not a pleasant one. There is an element of competition there, and yet they are members of BRICS. You shouldn't be more BRICS than other members of BRICS. Yes, one factors in the relationship between Russia and South Africa way back from the time of the anti-apartheid struggle. But I believe that South Africa has paid its dues to Russia. It doesn't mean that you are going to follow Russia down every line. In deciding how to handle a foreign policy conflict, you have several choices. Support one side, oppose one side, be neutral, be non-participating, and if you really find that your relationship is about to be threatened by what is going on, you whisper into the ears of your allies. China is doing that same thing now. You recall that at Davos, the Treasury Secretary of the United States met with the high-ranking Chinese diplomat who was present there. Now, they are talking. And they said, if you read that communique, that they were frank, positive. You know, those of us who are in this field, we decode words that are used. But now, to me, that is a warning to Russia by China. We are not going to allow this your war in Ukraine to now affect our relationship with the United States. There was a time it almost looked like it was going to affect it. Or we are not even going to allow our differences over Taiwan to affect other areas. And that is how you play this politics. If you just don't go bull into one corner and get yourself trapped, especially when it is not your own quarrel. Africa has this doctrine from the time of the OAU. The boundaries you inherit at independence must be respected. And that is a solid, up till now, a solid principle surrounding our attitude towards boundary changes. So to that extent, it's not, saints are not fighting saints. Nations must realize that, and you then plot your way through that saint.
Okay.
You've asked the question, where is Nigeria in all of this?
Yeah.
And you are quite right. Nigeria itself is guilty of an abdication of leadership in this area. And we keep giving up opportunities for us to exact this leadership. One thing you have to grant the first Obasanjo administration was that he sought to build a strong navy. Contracts were given out for naval ships to be built in, I believe it was in Japan or South Korea or somewhere along that line. How many of those ships are still functioning? Have we concentrated on, have we even debated and come to a conclusion about the role of the Navy in terms of our maritime neighbors? We seem to forget that apart from our neighbors in the north, our other neighbors covering from Badagry all the way to Port Harcourt, is the Atlantic Ocean. We seem not to be factoring the importance of that. It's only when other powers now come and start establishing presence there that we then wake up. We are a reactive nation. We don't like to think ahead. I've given you the example that 1976 was when we at the Institute proposed a solution to safeguarding the South Atlantic Ocean. That's never been taken up by anybody. The Navy itself is guilty of this. They will rather concentrate on the coastal areas. When, we often say, oh, best international practices. That's what we go after. Well, most coastal nations, important coastal nations, who are serious, have a coastal guard separated from the normal Navy so that the Navy can concentrate on threats and possibilities in the deep blue sea. Each time even at the National Conference in 2014, we proposed, or there was a proposal for establishment of a border guard that passed, and a coastal guard. All naval officers, both serving, retired, all the admirals and everything, they rose up as one against that. Why? Why are you more interested in oil bunkering activities than turning your Navy into the deep blue sea, where it is supposed to go? And let the Coastal Guard handle pirates and handle... it is an abdication of leadership, of influence, of responsibility by Nigeria, especially since the time of the second coming of General Obasanjo. Obasanjo pursued an activist foreign policy during his second term. But since then, we haven't had any president who is interested in foreign policy.
Okay. So let's go straight to it now. I will make some statements which probably you might say I'm just try to posit some ideas, but they are frontal statements. This is an open indication, an open invitation for war on the African continent to join what is shaping up, which we pray not will be the Third World War. Because apart from South Africa going this way with Russia, Russia has also put its firm grip across the African continent. And as we speak today, out of 52 countries, close to 20 have strong on Russian influence. Even Nigeria, which is a sad reality because all of our neighbors have big Russian influence in terms of military hardware and boots on the ground. There's a group called the Wagner Group. Mali, Guinea, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Russians are at our backyard. And trust me, they are surveying. They have surveillance. Sergei Lavrov too recently was in Egypt. He'd been talking to Ethiopia. There was some impact on the war that they made, the Russians, as regards the fight recently in Ethiopia. So it is an open invitation of war. And Africans with this have been invited to join the war in Ukraine, which is shaping up as another major conflict. And remember the words of Lumumba, that when the Europeans have their civil disagreements, they call it a world war. Is Africa ready to fight this war, despite the fact that it's just coming out of COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you, Rufai. I agree totally with what you have sketched out. It is not even the effect of COVID-19 that has not only demoralized but decimated African participation in creation of a world order as one is deteriorating. It is the lack of leadership. In Nigeria, don't say that one is over-focusing on Nigeria, that this is part of our hubris. We think Nigeria, but look, when you look at the resources that are available, when you look at what our military had done in the past, and not even in the too far past, look at what we did in Ecomog without the support of any superpower, and in spite of the infighting within the armed forces itself, we ended up enforcing a Pax Nigeriana in Liberia and in Syria alone and put an end to that civil war. If you read some of the things that the Americans have written about their surprise and their respect for Nigerian troops, Nigerian armed officers in Liberia and in, you will see the professional respect. But we then turned our back, and it then became, and it's under this regime. I mean, let's not beat about the bush. It's under this regime that we turned our back on an activist foreign policy and just started concentrating on Boko Haram, the jihadists, and opening our doors to them. The moment Gaddafi was overthrown in Libya, we should have foreseen what was going to happen here. And this, you know, I once met a man, well, since he's dead, I'll mention his name, Chief Adebo, who looked at me one day. He said, I am heartbroken that the country that we envisaged right in his lifetime was going to pieces in terms of administrative thinking, in terms of brain trust and so on. He said, but Bolaji, I feel more sorry for your own generation because in your lifetime, this country will go to pieces. And I just wonder what your reaction will be to it. That this is part of what has led us to establishing, which we will launch after the election, the Academy of International Affairs. Because we can't see any debate on what Nigeria should be doing, going on at the level at which it will be going on. And members of this academy who are all over 70, retired, therefore they cannot be bullied, are going to be holding, you know, seminars, activities to prompt the mentality of Nigerians into what is going to happen to Nigeria itself. If it is not careful, we need, on the African scene now, leaders who are going to have a vision of what Africa should be doing in the world order. If we don't have that, they will poach us. African unity, I'm sorry, is becoming just as useless as the OAU in its latter days. And it's because of the absence of people like Gaddafi, absence of people like even Thabo Mbeki, absence of I could name names. You know them, who are no longer on the scene. And we now end up with a whole battery of leaders who are a disgrace on the world scene. I don't know whether I saw your who mentioned something about Russian African Summit coming up. What did we gain from the American African Summit going on? You saw the leader of is it Gabon? Why was he given a role to play? He couldn't even understand where he was.
Cameroon.
An old man suffering from
Paul
Alzheimer's.
Biya. Paul Biya of Cameroon.
Yes, Cameroon, thank you. Yes, you were given a script to read, but why give him a script? You want to tell me that the Americans didn't know his medical condition? Or are we still playing one head of state is equal to another head of state is equal to another? They're just laughing at us the disposition of Paul Biya. So really, we need a new set of African leaders. What else do you want me to say?
Okay, Prof.
No more Nkrumah, no more Secretary, no more, even the emperor in Ethiopia.
Haile
He had
Selassie.
his head well screwed on. Haile Selassie. And yet we know, our so-called socialists were talking about, this man is ancient, we don't need monarchies in Africa again. Look at the people who have replaced them in Ethiopia. Have they done Ethiopia proud? Have they done Africa proud?
Well, Prof, I mean, the point is well made that this would look like an error of judgment on the part of the South Africans. But some people have also said that could this be a foreign policy stunt, a bargaining chip to place South Africa in a better situation to negotiate better in trade dealings with the U.S., which has said it is expressing concern about what has happened, or with its major trading partners that are in fact in Europe, Germany, the UK, and then of course if you add to that Japan. So would this be a stunt that could help South Africa to negotiate better, or it will lower South Africa's geopolitical gravitas?
I'm more worried about its impact on Africa itself. Because any foreign policy or strategic initiative by a country like South Africa, it may instigate a counter move by the competitors of China and Russia to now themselves now decide they are going to have naval exercises with, and they will pick. I mean, you want to tell me from Gambia, or no, from Senegal all the way down, that America will not find allies that it could entice to have military exercises with? Of course, that is my fear. Nobody is going to take this exercise seriously, Dr. Abati. I've just told you, 4 corvettes South African Navy has. Only one in 2 years has gone out into the ocean. They have 3 submarines. None has gone out into the ocean. None in the past 4 years. So what assets are they bringing to this Russia-Chinese naval exercise? What assets are they bringing in? So, I mean, people will laugh. Leave them. But they are giving us an opportunity for us now. Nobody will accuse us of imperialism if we now say we are now going to be having annual exercises with selected African countries in the South Atlantic Ocean. And before you know it, it then becomes a notion not of cooperation, not nuclear free, but a notion of conflict. This is, why I am so worried about what, South Africa has done.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like you to speak also to this race for the African continent in recent times. You just talked about the US Africa Summit, and now in a few months we're going to be going to, well, some African nations will be going to Russia for the Russia African Summit. We've seen an increased interest in investments on the African continent by the Chinese. I mean, Nigeria is a case in point. What is this race for the African continent, particularly by these superpowers, to gain control? And how can the African continent turn to take back ownership in terms of being truly independent rather than being, a pawn in the piece for these superpowers as to who has the most control?
The answer to your first question is that Africa is still the most endowed with mineral and natural resources. Look at the debate on the climate change, which is still the virgin continent left in the world, still with massive forests, still with untapped natural resources. Of course it is Africa. They've decimated Europe. Given the population between China and India, they've decimated Asia. Africa is the only continent left. And please, maybe that will be a topic for another day. The cartographers deliberately created the kind of maps that you have. China, United States, and Europe all will fit into Africa. And there will still be space left if you just look at the square meters of each continent. But the cartographers during the colonial period created this map which makes Africa look like it's just one of the continents. Africa is not just one of the continents, and they know it. So there is this stampede, another Berlin Conference stampede for carving up Africa into spheres of influence. And whichever one you cannot get, well, you try to destabilize by the activities of the jihadists, activities of all kinds of militia running all around the place. For the life of me, who was enticing the Tigrarians who were in power in Ethiopia for 30 years? And then when they lost power, it was then they discovered that they were marginalized. And weapons were then pumped into it to challenge the unity and integrity of Ethiopia. They were supported from abroad, and thank God the Ethiopians were able to face them down. And at the end, you had the agreement that they will what they should have done from the beginning. But they've lost a lot of lives. They've lost, all kinds of things. So they are not going to leave Africa alone. I feel sorry for your generation. Like Chief Adebo said to me that he feels sorry for my generation. I feel sorry for your generation, because you are going to face the consequences of this new scramble for Africa. And Africa is not ready for it because we have poor leadership.
Okay, sir. In all of this, let me quote the song of Fela, Beast of No Nation, that says, East-West Bloc versus West Bloc East, waiting united inside United Nation. One veto vote is equal to 92 or more, that Fela sang then. But it seems as if our presidential candidate don't even know this politics going on. What would you say after all this foreign policy talk about our frontline presidential candidate? Do they even understand all of this we've just said?
If they did, they wouldn't all troop like houseboys to Chatham House. And if you look at the audience in Chatham House, they are made up of Nigerians in the diaspora who don't even have the PVC. How many English people did you see in that Chatham House for each one of them? And why that? Why are we failing? 1959 elections, did you find Awolowo, Sardauna, Zik, Aminu Kano trooping to Chatham House? No. 1964 elections, did you find them? No. 1979, did Shagari, Awolowo, Zik go to Chatham House? No. This Chatham House syndrome, where you want to be embraced by a foreign community that treats you with contempt, started with Buhari and Dasuki in 2015. It started then. But then I thought we had got over it, that was just a one-off. This year has surprised me to no end. There's something you know that I don't know, or they know that I don't know. Maybe you need the blessing of the British elite to be president of Nigeria. But then they are not addressing our issue.
Okay, sir.
Are they?
Okay, Prof.
When they, when they go there.
Thank you so much, Prof. Really appreciate you for your time.